This video, I'll be showing you where the best gaming PCs are online and where you can buy them from for Australia. Let's just get straight into it. Now, in terms of my expectations for each PC and its retailer, I need good business reputation, so this is going to be coming from my personal experience, a good value for the gaming PC itself, nice upgradability, which means we're limited to AM5 because currently Intel Core Ultra series isn't very good in terms of upgradability and it's very uncertain as to the future of the platform. And then we also need a decent performance and a good price range. So the price range that I've chosen today is between 1,200 and 2,000 Australian dollars, as that is the price range that most people are going to be buying in. Now, starting off with our first PC is Mwave. I believe they're only in Sydney, however they do offer nationwide shipping. Now, this first PC has a Ryzen 5 7500F, 32 gigs of DDR5, 1TB SSD, and an RTX 4060 for a price of $1,849. Now, in terms of the looks of it, that's how it looks. Obviously, I don't have the PC in person, but you can see they've actually got a micro ATX motherboard in an ATX case. That might look a little funky, but they do use a CPU cooler, a radiator for the CPU cooler, which is from Thermaltake. Now, in terms of the specs, that's a pretty good value. A Ryzen 5 7500F is very upgradable for most systems, and it means you can get a 9800X3D in theory, and even beyond that when AM6 comes out. Additionally, the 4060 isn't great. It's only got 8 gigs of VRAM, but it definitely can play esports games and some lighter AAA titles with no issues at all. I'd imagine it'll still be good for years to come and will still be supported. However, when the next generation of gaming consoles come out, it will definitely reduce its performance. 32 gigs of RAM is actually something I didn't quite expect. Now, they do mention it's only 5600 megatransfers a second, but it is using DRAM chips that aren't from China, and I'll get into that a little bit later. It's using South Korean, I believe it should be using South Korean DRAM chips, as it is coming from Thermaltake. Now, moving on to our next retailer, Scorptec. These guys are kind of my favorite to just buy computer parts from in general. They're pretty reliable in terms of the service, and yeah, so is Mwave. I've bought from them, no issues in the past. Now, just as a note, I haven't bought any gaming PCs from any company except for Radium PCs, but I'll get to them later. I haven't bought any from them, but from what I've heard, there's no inherent issues with any of them, except for a few companies, which I'll get into later. Next up is Scorptec. This system is an AM4 system. Now, the reason why I included this was actually because it has a 5700X3D CPU. Now, yes, it's not on AM5, however, it does still show a very good value. Now, the 5700X3D is very competitive in terms of its performance, especially in relation to AM5. It performs basically on par with the 7500F and the 7600 because of that 3D V-Cache technology. It's on a B550 chipset. It does unfortunately only have 16 gigs of DDR4 RAM, which makes it harder to justify. And additionally, it only features an 8 gigabyte card of the RX 9060 XT, which isn't very future focused. So I'd kind of steer away from this, but I did want to mention it because it does have a 5700X3D. However, you won't be able to upgrade that after. So I'd say probably don't buy that one. However, this next one is also from Scorptec. Now, this is a bit of a weird system configuration. It's got an RTX 3060 12GB, which is important. There's an 8GB that you want to look out for. You don't want to buy that, you want to get the 12GB. It's selling a 3060, which is an older GPU, but it's still definitely capable of playing games. Now, it pairs this with the AMD Ryzen 7 7700, 16 gigs of DDR5 at 6000 MHz, admittedly, so it is faster DDR5, but only 16 gigs, and a 1TB SSD. Now, in terms of the value proposition, I'd say that the Mwave system is still a better value because you're getting 32 gigs of DDR5 and you're getting a Ryzen 5 7500F, which even though it's slower in performance, there is a faster graphics card, and in terms of single-threaded performance, which is what's important for games, it will match the 7700 very easily. Additionally, you can also overclock the 7500. At $2,000 though, it's a little hard to justify with a 3060. Scorptec doesn't have the best value systems, but they're definitely a consistent company that I can recommend. And if you want reliability, definitely buy Scorptec. In terms of Centrecom, their gaming PCs, this one was actually interesting. It piqued my interest. Now, you might think that the Ryzen 5 8400F is actually faster than the 7500F. That's not. It's not the case at all. Just because it has an 8 in front doesn't mean it's faster. In fact, I think it's more on par with the Ryzen 5 5600. I think it's a little bit faster than that because it's based on the APU processors, although this one doesn't have the graphics card integrated into it. It doesn't have the APU element of the CPU. Now, for $1,600, it's actually quite a compelling value. So you're actually getting an RTX 5060, which is comparable to, I believe, the 3070 in terms of performance. So you're getting actually quite a fair bit of performance there. You're also getting a reliable motherboard with the Gigabyte B650M gaming motherboard, a 1TB SSD, which is kind of standard across all these builds. 16 gigs of DDR5, I would have liked to see 32, but at $1,600, it's definitely a better value. At $1,799, it's a lot harder to justify. The build also looks pretty good. I've used this case a number of times from Thermaltake. I quite like it. And Centrecom, I haven't had any issues with them personally in terms of my orders. However, you should look out for this. It is a single stick of DDR5, which is important to note because these other builds, you can see, don't list it. However, I'd imagine that Scorptec is using 2 8GB sticks of DDR5. And then if we go to Mwave, we can see that they're using 2 16GB of DDR5. So 32 gigs of DDR5 from Mwave is actually quite impressive, especially considering it's a little more expensive than this build here. However, 1 stick of DDR5 is less detrimental to your system performance than 1 stick of DDR4, and that's because the technology is more advanced. I can't remember exactly how it works, but it's less detrimental and you can definitely get by with it. There's a hardware unbox video that I can recommend you watch. Next is Radium PCs. Now, I actually reviewed one of their gaming PCs. If you're set on buying them, I recommend you just watch the full video and you'll get a full rundown of my issues with them. My main issue though is their images don't match. So this image, this CPU cooler here, doesn't match with what you're getting. So the AMD Stealth cooler, that's just the stock standard AMD stock cooler, that's what you typically get. To get the system that looks like this, you have to select the Radium Air, which is another $40. And then on top of that, you also have to, if you want all the fans, you have to press this button and get 6. And at $1,459, you're paying for a Ryzen 5 5500, which is a slow AM4 processor, and an RX 7600 on a system that's not that great. They also shipped it to me without much packing material inside the case itself, so there was no support on the GPU. And yeah, I'm surprised it actually arrived all in one piece. The build quality was fine, but I definitely don't recommend them personally. It also took quite a while for them to get the order process going, and I didn't really receive an update on it. Yeah, definitely don't recommend them. Now, in contrast, Aftershock is also a small business like Radium Gaming PCs. They exclusively sell gaming PCs like Radium do. And this is an interesting system. So you're getting a Ryzen 5 7500F and a 5060 for $1,745. It's quite a good value. But if we look at the memory, it's interesting. So they're actually using KingBank KJXS series memory. Now the difference between this memory and typical memory is that this is Chinese memory. It uses Chinese DRAM chips, which is important because Chinese DRAM chips, it's unknown as to the quality of them because they're so new and developing fast. But what's important is we don't know how reliable or how long these are going to last in the market. Now, the alternative to this is their slightly more expensive, $50 more expensive system, which you get a 5060 and a Ryzen 5 7500F, and you get some Lexar memory, which I believe does use Korean DRAM chips. So yeah, I definitely would recommend this over that, simply from the terms of reliability. It also looks a little bit nicer, but to be honest, both builds look pretty nice, I'd say. The 5060 is plenty fast enough, 8 gigs of VRAM, still not the best, but it's definitely a fast card. And the Ryzen 5 7500F is a good CPU that I recommend across the board for any build. Most of these builds are featuring it because it's just a good value. It's like the Ryzen 5 7600, but it has a little bit less performance, but it's not enough to measure. Next up is PC case gear. This was a really interesting value. So they're actually using a RX 9060 8GB. So it's slower than the 9060 XT, not by much, but it's still a pretty okay card to use in terms of gaming. I don't know what the performance parity is for NVIDIA, but it's still very much a fast graphics card. I'd say it's probably a little faster than the 8GB RTX 5050, but again, that is speculation. I don't know personally. Now, they are using they're using two 8GB sticks of DDR5 5200 megahertz RAM. So definitely slower, but at 1549, it's actually a compelling value, and I could definitely recommend it. In terms of the aesthetics of the case, it's alright, it's passable. Definitely a more bare bones case, and they are using a micro ATX motherboard in an ATX case, which is an interesting choice. But because it is a dark case, I'd say it's okay. You also get a 1TB SSD as standard, and again, the Ryzen 5 7500F. Now, this is also an interesting build from them. You can get a 5060 for $1,649 with a Ryzen 5 7600, so slightly faster, and same motherboard, I believe, same RAM, 1TB SSD again, 650 watt power supply, but also a better looking case. So personally, if you were choosing out of these two, I'd pay the extra $100. You get a 5060 instead of a 9060. The 5060 is going to perform better, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, this also just looks better as a PC overall, and it's using a micro ATX motherboard in a micro ATX case. Then UMart, don't buy from these guys. Hardware Unboxed did a whole video about how they weren't honoring warranties and they couldn't get a replacement RAM set to this guy. Can't recommend them at all. Don't buy from them. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. If you did enjoy this video, please make sure you like, subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And yeah, if you're interested in Radium PCs and you want more info, check out that video. It's going to be right here. Anyways, that's it. I'm TechBiz, and I'm out.